Before we begin this week's episode of the Grow Your Wealthy Mindset podcast, I want to tell you of a great guide that I made just for you. It's the 12 financial mistakes that keep physicians from building wealth. After talking to hundreds of physicians, I've heard many mistakes, and these are the ones that I thought were most important to share so that you can potentially avoid making these mistakes, or if you've already made them, learn a bit about how you might be able to recover. You can grab the guide at my website, www.growyourwealthymindset.com/12 financial mistakes. Now on to this week's episode. Hello, welcome to the Grow Your Wealthy Mindset podcast, where it is all about helping amazing physicians just like you create a wealthy life free from burnout and with the financial security to practice medicine on your own terms. I'm your host, Dr. Elisa Zhang. Hello, and welcome back to the Grow Your Wealthy Mindset podcast. Today's episode is actually part 2 of me talking about my recent trip to Ireland, including talking about all the financials of planning and executing the trip. If you haven't listened to part 1, I would go ahead and start with that episode before listening to today's episode. During the last episode, I ended with us leaving Ashford Castle, and this episode is going to start off with our drive from Ashford Castle to reaching Derry, which is entering Northern Ireland. Now we're going to jump right back into the original recording. We spent the afternoon driving up to Derry, and when we arrived in Derry, which is now in Northern Ireland, we checked in our hotel. So I will say that we did go ahead and get the UK ETA. So during my research process for this trip, I did learn that starting in 2025, lucky us, the UK does require US citizens to apply for their electronic travel authorization, which costs $22.40 a person. You download the app and do the application from your phone, and we actually got a response within like 5 minutes of doing it. That being said, when we crossed the border from Ireland to Northern Ireland, we wouldn't know if our GPS didn't tell us. There's really nothing to indicate the border. I don't even think there was a sign. The only difference now was instead of the speed limit being posted as kilometers per hour, it was now posted in miles per hour. When we arrived in Derry, we checked into our hotel. I let Nathan go ahead and rest while I went and explored the city walls around Derry and just walked the walls. Then I went back and got him, and we went to dinner together. After dinner, we went to the site of Bloody Sunday. So Bloody Sunday refers to a demonstration where people were marching and protesting the internment without trial. This was sponsored by the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association. What started out as a peaceful protest became a bloody massacre, and 13 marchers were shot dead and 13 were wounded, and one of those who were wounded actually died later. In 1994, there were 2 brothers who started painting murals in this area, which were quite powerful to see. You can see pictures of these murals on my Facebook page, as well as some of the other pictures from this trip. So after our walk of seeing the murals, we headed back and turned in for the night. Before leaving Derry the next day, I visited the Guildhall, which is a lovely building. It has beautiful stained glass windows as well, and it has a really nice exhibit inside. It has free entry. It's actually their city hall, which is great. It also holds 3 peace prizes won by John Hume, a Nobel Peace Prize, and 2 other peace prizes that were named after MLK and Gandhi. Hume is actually the only person to have won all 3 peace prizes for his work as the primary architect in the Good Friday Agreement. Our plan for this day had originally been to go to the Antrim coast, but we did a little change of our itinerary and headed to Belfast instead. So a storm had come in and there were really high winds. One of the things I wanted to see on the Antrim coast was the Carrick-Aridi rope bridge, and that typically will be closed if the wind is too high, so you won't be able to cross it. So I was able to change my reservation online for that, and I was hoping that the winds would be a little less the next day, such that we would be able to cross the rope bridge. I kept checking the weather on a weather app, and that seemed like it would be the case. Sometimes when you're traveling, it helps to be a little flexible so that you can change things around if necessary. From Derry to Belfast, it was about a 1.5-hour drive. We stopped at Belfast Castle, but unfortunately there was a private event there, so we could not go inside. However, we could still see the gardens as well as the view of Belfast from the castle. We then drove to the downtown center area of Belfast, parked the car, and explored the central city area. We had lunch at the cafe at City Hall, which employs people with disabilities, and that was nice. Around 3 o'clock, we went back and got our car and drove to our hotel, which was located in the Queen's Quarter, which is south of the central area, and then got checked in. We left our car at the hotel and then took a bus back into Belfast and actually went to the Titanic Quarter since I had purchased time tickets in order to see the Titanic Museum. The Titanic was built in Belfast, and there's a huge and comprehensive Titanic Museum, which is a really popular attraction. Even with the time tickets, the museum felt really crowded. I think the museum is done really well, but it was also just a little too many people. When we finished at the museum, and it also allows you to see a little boat that's next door, we walked around a little bit more in the Titanic Quarter area and then took another bus to go back to the central area of Belfast. We ended up walking to a restaurant in an area with a lot of Asian restaurants just because I had eaten a lot of Irish food and was ready for a little bit more variety. We had a lovely dinner and ended up walking home from the restaurant since the restaurant actually ended up being kind of between the central area and the Queen's Quarter area. So then the next day, we ended up going up to the Antrim coast. We started out at the Carrick-a-Reid rope bridge, but unfortunately, it still was closed because the winds were still high enough that they deemed that it wasn't safe to cross the bridge. We were still able to hike to the bridge and see the bridge, but we just couldn't cross over the bridge and see the little island on the other side. At least the wind did mean that there were some clear skies. It was pretty windy, but I'll take the blue skies so that we could get some nice photographs. We headed to the Giant's Causeway, and that was completely open. We were able to hike in that area. And actually, I heard that there was something that happened at Giant's Causeway just soon after we left. So I'm glad it didn't happen and we were able to experience that. It was actually quite fun to hike on the causeway itself, which is famous for its basalt columns. I've seen these large balsa columns before. You can see them in Iceland as well. But this was the first time we actually were able to really walk on them and climb over them and climb like all over the place, as opposed to just maybe climb on a few of the lower ones. We also made a stop at Dunluns Castle, but that actually was also closed due to the high winds. Those castles are more like ruins and they're right at the coast. And so I guess they didn't want people walking around the ruins and possibly get blown off into the ocean. Our last stop at the Antrim coast was to check out the Dark Hedges, which is a road lined with 250-year-old beech trees and appears as the King's Road in the Game of Thrones. Sadly, a lot of the original beech trees have fallen, but it still has that lovely ambiance. And luckily for us, it wasn't too crowded while we were there. We headed back to Belfast and had dinner in Belfast. After dinner, we drove around in what's called the sectarian neighborhoods, where there's really a division. They actually have a wall up, and there is one neighborhood that is staunchly pro-British, and another neighborhood that's nationalist and pro-Ireland. There are many murals in this area as well, and so we stopped to see some of the murals and just kind of look around. In the pro-British area, you see a lot of UK flags hanging up, but maybe less murals. There seem to be actually more graffiti on the wall on the British side. I would say there are more murals on the nationalist side. The next day, we left Northern Ireland and we went to the Boyne Valley of Ireland itself. We visited Monaster Boyce, which is a ruined monastery that has two ornately carved high crosses, which are considered to be the best example of these crosses in Ireland. They're illustrated from top to bottom with biblical stories, and that gave monks a teaching tool when they went to preach to the people. We also stopped at Millefont Abbey, another ruined abbey in the area, and then headed to Brunei Braun. I had reserved time tickets for noon to see Knowth and Newgrange. These are both passage tombs that were built between 2000 and 3000 BC, so super old. Knowth has two passages, but while you can actually climb on top of Knowth, you can't actually go inside the passages. Since our reservation also allowed us to go to Newgrange, then we actually were able to go in the passage tomb at Newgrange. The passage tomb was built such that during the winter solstice, the sun lines up so that the path of light actually goes down the passage into the sacred chamber, which is at the center of the passage tomb. We actually got to see the demonstration of this when we were inside the center of the tomb, so that was really cool. Apparently, there's a raffle you can enter in order to potentially win tickets to actually be able to be inside the sacred chamber in the center of the passage tomb, actually at the time of winter solstice. Our next stop was the Hill of Tara, where we arrived just in time to see the film and then go on the guided tour. After that, we headed to the town of Trim and checked into our hotel, which was right across from Trim Castle. We went out for dinner and then went on an evening stroll where we got to wander around the ruins of a cathedral as well as an old 13th century hospital. We ended our evening at the James Griffin pub where there were some local musicians playing Irish music, and that was a lovely way to end the evening. I actually let us sleep in a little late the next day. Trim Castle actually didn't open till 10 a.m. We did go ahead and get packed and checked out before heading to Trim Castle. We got to the castle right when it opened at 10 and signed up for the first tour. We wandered the castle grounds until the tour actually started. Then after visiting the castle, we went and got lunch, went back to the hotel to get our car, and then drove to the Powers Court Estate and Gardens, which is considered the best gardens in Ireland. Unfortunately, the estate house at Powers Court had a fire many years ago, so although part of it has been reconstructed, it's only available for private events. The gardens really are gorgeous there. They're super extensive and it really takes you over an hour to walk through the gardens. We also went to the Powers Court waterfall, which is the highest waterfall in Ireland. Then we headed to Dublin and we drove to Trinity College where we were able to get checked into our room and drop off our luggage before returning our rental car. After returning our rental car, we went and found a pub where there was some local music and where we could actually get seated. That was a little tough. It was really crowded in the pubs with music. That made for a really slow service for dinner, but the food was actually decent. And then afterwards, we kind of did a bit of a pub walk or pub crawl through the temple bar scene before heading back to our room and turning in for the night. The next day was Friday, August 8th. And that was my birthday. So I spent my birthday this year in Dublin. This was my birthday trip. I do tend to like to do a vacation for my birthday, often an international one. So I started my birthday with a guided tour of the Book of Kells. So this was supposed to be a small group guided tour, but apparently I was the only one to sign up. So I got my own private tour of the Book of Kells experience. The guided Book of Kells experience was 65 euros a person. Nathan's not really interested in illumination, so I let him sleep in and have some rest and relaxation time by himself. After the Book of Kells, I went and got Nathan, and we explored a little bit more while we walked towards 14th Henrietta Street, where I had made reservations for their 11 a.m. tour. 14th Henrietta Street was originally built as an 18th century Georgian mansion during the good times for Dublin, but then later became a tenant house during a time of poverty for Dublin. It was really interesting to learn about Irish history through the people who previously lived at 14th Henrietta Street. We went to Ting for a quick and healthy lunch before heading to Dublin Castle, where I had tickets for the 2 p.m. tour. We actually got to Dublin Castle a little early, so then we went to check out the Chester Beatty Library, which is right next to the castle. The Chester Beatty Library actually has a wonderful collection of rare manuscripts and beautifully illustrated books from around the world. Alfred Chester Beatty was a rich American and he retired in Ireland. So he left his collection to this library. So it actually is more like a museum. There was really a lot more to see than I expected. So we didn't actually finish seeing everything. We went to our tour of Dublin Castle and then afterwards came back so I could finish seeing those exhibits. If you're going to see Dublin Castle, I really recommend doing the tour. This was another activity covered by the Heritage Card. With the self-guided tour, you just get to see the staterooms, but with the guided tour, you actually get to go under the castle and see its foundation, which is actually what looks like a medieval castle. So it's called Dublin Castle, but the original medieval castle was destroyed at some point, and it was rebuilt in the late 17th to 18th centuries in a Georgian style. It's still lovely to see, but I really actually enjoyed seeing the foundation and seeing the actual medieval stonework castle part as well. You also get to see the underground river and you get to see the Chapel Royal with the guided tour, which you don't get to see with the self-guided tour. The Chapel Royal is also really beautiful and I think worth seeing. The guided tour does end in the staterooms. It takes you through some of the staterooms, but not all of them. But then at the end of the tour, you can go through the rest of the staterooms by yourself. The guided tour was about an hour, and I think we spent an extra 30 minutes actually just looking at the staterooms ourselves. So once we were done with Dublin Castle, we went back to the Chester B Library and then headed back to Trinity College because I booked a 4:30 tour for the Trinity Trails walking tour led by one of the Trinity College students. Didn't I tell you I like to pack it in? The tour was actually quite nice for us to learn more about the college itself, the history of the college, and to go in one of its most beautiful buildings. There are also a lot of weddings that are held at Trinity College, and there were actually 2 weddings that day. After our walking tour, we did actually have some time to relax and get showered and changed because I had made reservations for a fancy dinner for my birthday. We went to Chapter 1 restaurant, which is a 2-star Michelin restaurant, and got their tasting menu. My husband's really learned how to embrace these Michelin star restaurants and their tasting menus. It really was a lovely experience. That dinner was a big splurge. It came out to be 473 euros after tip, which is quite a lot more than we spent on any other meal. Our dinners at the castles were between 100 and 150 euros, and then all our other dinners in Ireland were around 80 euros or less. After dinner, we went to O'Donoghue's, which is the home pub of the Dubliners, which is one of Ireland's traditional Irish music groups. That was also a lot of fun. It was pretty crowded, but luckily we were able to get a space along the wall and eventually even got stools to sit on. And that's how I spent my birthday this year. We still have one more day in Dublin. We started Saturday with a tour of Kilmanheim, which is an old prison that held many political prisoners, which defied British rule. The prison was also covered by the Heritage Card. It's available to see by guided tour only, and those tickets go super fast. You have to make reservations as soon as those tickets become available 28 days in advance. After a tour of the prison, we checked out the gardens at the Modern Art Museum, which was across the street from the prison. We didn't actually go inside the Museum of Modern Art. I'm just not as big of a fan of modern art, but the gardens were lovely and those were free. I think the museum might have actually been free as well. We headed back to central Dublin for lunch, and then after lunch, I went to the National Museum of Archaeology, which was also free. My husband's really not a museum person, so I left him to relax in our room while I enjoyed the museum on my own. In the evening, we went to the Belvedere Irish Nights, which is a dinner and theater performance with Irish music and dancing. It's a bit touristy, but it's still a lot of fun, and the food was actually quite good too. I paid a little extra for premiere seating, so we were in the first row, and that meant that in the end, my husband and I actually got on stage and learned to do some Irish dancing as well. The ticket for the dinner and show for the Belvedere Irish Nights was 52 euros a person for a regular seat, and then it was 58 euros for a guaranteed front row seat. Those prices are per person, and then there was a booking fee on top of that of a few euros. And that pretty much wraps up our trip. We flew out the next morning back to the United States. Our flights home were uneventful, and that wraps up our time in Ireland. Well, this is a financial podcast, and so while I talked about everything we did, let me dive a little deeper into how much all of it cost. I already went to all the details about the hotels. Our rental car for 12 full days was $721.11. We ended up spending $244.42 on gas. Ireland does have a few tolls, and we spent $10.63 on tolls, which isn't too bad. Parking cost us $9.92. We ended up spending $150.58 in total for Ubers and ride-sharing services, and that included getting from our own home to Cleveland's airport and back home after the end of our trip. Otherwise, we just did ride shares in Dublin. The buses we took in Belfast ended up costing $7.86, and our ferry to the Aran Islands was $119.64. Again, this was for 2 adults. The total transportation cost came out to $1,269.16. All of our food, including dining out and groceries, came out to just over $1,800. We ended up spending close to $1,250 for all our activities and entertainment. That included the heritage cards and all other entry fees and tours. I really didn't do much shopping on this trip. I ended up buying one wool sweater, which was around 100 euros. In total, not including my sweater, we spent $10,596.64 for 2 weeks in Ireland for two adults. That actually feels a little higher than we typically spend when we're in Europe. In 2022, we went to Europe for 5 weeks and spent a total of around $14,000. Though we spent a lot of time in Eastern Europe, which does admittedly cost less than Western Europe. When it comes to how much trips cost, I'm a big proponent on planning spending, and a lot of the spending for this trip was planned in advance. It wasn't like I made a specific budget of, okay, we're going to go to Ireland for 2 weeks and I'm going to make a budget of X amount of dollars. Instead, what I do is kind of start looking at what the prices of hotels are going to be, what the price of airfare is going to be. I start looking at prices of activities and kind of adding up all these costs. Once I kind of get an idea of the cost, I decide if that's something I still want to do, and then I start booking things. It is more of an evolution as I'm planning the trip and looking at the cost to see what the outcome cost will be. Of course, Rick's guidebook will give you suggestions of what costs are for different countries, which is also helpful. Before I actually fully commit, I can find out the cost of the flights and all the hotels, as well as the cost of the rental car. For every hotel I booked, I had the ability to cancel with advance notice. That could be as short as 24 hours, or it could be, I think 2 weeks was the most amount of time required before arrival to be able to cancel with a full refund. There are some things like food where I'm not necessarily quite sure how much we end up spending. I ended up deciding to plan for $120 a day for food and multiplied that by 14 days. And then I added an extra $300 in because I knew I was going to do a fancy dinner for my birthday. That led me to planning to spend around $2,000 for food, and we ended up spending $1,800. So pretty close. I estimated spending $1,000 for activities, and we ended up spending closer to $1,200. Between spending a little less on food and spending a little bit more on activities, it actually all averaged out and fell right within what I had planned to begin with. My initial estimates when I added all the known costs and added my estimated cost for the trip was $10,500. And so I just rounded that I planned for this trip to cost around $11,000. And we actually ended up really close to that original $10,500. Had we gone over $11,000, that would have been okay too. But that's how I go through the planning process when it comes to how much a trip's going to cost, especially a trip that I'm planning myself. Of course, if I'm going on a tour, most of the expense of that will be the tour and the flight. And so you kind of know all that in advance. That was the case when we went to Africa earlier this summer. When I travel in Africa, I do use a travel agency to do that planning. And so I know there's going to be maybe a few extra things like any purchases, maybe additional experiences, of course, any shopping and other incidentals. But the bulk of those trips is paid to the travel agency as well as when I buy the flights. If you have any questions on how I plan travel, feel free to email me at growyourwealthymindset@gmail.com. Also, feel free to email me any comments. Did you like this episode or did you hate it? What would you like to see more of? I'd love to hear from you. I created this podcast to spread more financial knowledge and information, but also to encourage people to talk more about money and make talking about money less taboo. I hope you've all had a great summer, and if you love to travel like I do, that you had a great adventure at some point this summer as well. Thank you so much for being a listener of the Grow Your Wealthy Mindset podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, I would love it if you could share it with your friends and colleagues. And now for the disclaimer. I am not a certified financial planner, accountant, or attorney, and nothing I say should be construed as professional investment, tax, or legal advice. This show is primarily for your education and entertainment. I am a physician, but I'm probably not your physician. So if you need any medical advice, please contact your own physician. Thank you. Don't forget to pick up your guide, 12 Financial Mistakes That Keep Physicians from Building Wealth. You can grab that guide at my website, www.growyourwealthymindset.com/12 financial mistakes. You'll also find that link in the show notes.